Hello and welcome to the first episode of the Below the 92 podcast. My name is Luke Rutherhead. I'm joined here by
Finn Carter, hello.
And
Mark K.I.
So in today's episode we're going to be sort of discussing the role that non-league plays basically in players' careers, doing it for development's sake and also for the sake of a retiring player sort of winding down their career and the opportunities and limitations that has for them. Let's get started off with an example of one young player, Mikel Antonio. Finn, have you got a bit more to tell us about that?
Yeah, so obviously he started his career at Tooting and Mitcham when he was 18. Shined there. I think he played 20 games for them before securing a move to the EFL. But without that sort of experience in non-league, where he gained physicality against, we're talking first team football here. This is how you gain the physicality and the know-how to play first team football. It's all good being in academy systems, but we've often seen players that go through the academy, get into first team football, and just don't cut it physicality wise. But Mikel Antonio is known for his physicality, and I think this sort of spell in non-league really helped that.
Yeah, absolutely. Mark, have you got any other players that you found out about that have sort of definitely gained a bit of a foot up from non-league football?
So Jared Bowen actually used to play non-league football after he failed to convince Aston Villa and Cardiff during the trials in his earlier years, and then he joined Hereford. And after he joined Hereford, he said it had taught him what it meant. They won games, and Hereford was his local club when he was a boy, so obviously he had that connection as well to the club. But after saying that, he was in a relegation battle with Hereford, and after going through that, he said, "I think anything that happens now, you're ready to deal with it."
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge long list of players that have made it to the top flight of English football, that have made it through non-league. Recent example, obviously, is Pelly Radakampanzu of Luton.
Yes.
Making up all of the tiers of English football. And I think you're right, especially with the example of Antonio. You gain traits that you wouldn't necessarily learn in the academy game. It's a completely different ball game, literally, in non-league. Look at the recent example of a player going the other way. So Ben Foster, who's obviously been a very important figure in Premier League history. Great goalkeeper, very successful career, but recently last season, got the call to play for Wrexham in the last half of the season. And he's sort of compared in his own podcast, actually, the two different playing styles of the Premier League and non-league. And he's actually said that if you put all the 20 Premier League goalkeepers in the National League as a weekend, he thinks that they would struggle.
That's a statement, isn't it?
It is indeed. But yeah, it just shows, and I think for him particularly, he obviously started his career at Wrexham, so it was sort of a full circle moment for him. And yeah, I think from a player's perspective, Wrexham, for example, you would really want to be a part of that journey, and you gain that closeness to fans again.
Going back to why first team football is so good quickly again for young sort of players. I remember Foster talking about how playing for Wrexham as a young boy teached him just sort of less sort of physicality wise, but more about just respecting people. And I feel like these days a lot of people that come out of the academy are with other players their sort of age and stuff, and sometimes they don't really get the what's the word I'm looking for, the hard truth.
The realities
of I think sometimes that's important, and I think Foster mentioned that quite a lot. I know Wrexham weren't National League at that time, but sort of a lower level, playing in that sort of environment can really help toughen you up, and it's not just about the physicality, there's also mental aspects to it. Which you gain from sort of National League, lower league football.
Well, David Raya went through something similar. He also had a stint at non-league, so he played for Southport, and he said they were some of the best times of his career in terms of learning and development. Because he was at Blackburn and he was loaned out, and Blackburn basically did everything for him, his laundry, his breakfast. But when he went to Southport, it was just a wake up call, and he had to do everything himself. which taught him a lot of lessons, obviously.
Yeah, I think in recent times as well, there's definitely been more of an appreciation for non-league football in general from players. I think COVID sort of acted as a bit of a reset. People looking elsewhere to find their fix of football, and I think that shone the spotlight a bit more on non-league. And again, to use the example of Wrexham, you've got more of a media presence now. In obviously they've just been promoted to League One now, but once they were down there, gaining a lot more media traction, and I think that's a really beneficial thing, because that not only shines a spotlight on that top division of non-league, but it also filters down as well, and there's just a great appreciation for it. You've got things like, there's actually an article that I wrote on our website about non-league day, and I think for players, something that I highlighted in that article as well, for players you just get that greater sense of community that you wouldn't usually have in the higher divisions of professional football. I think it's really important. I think, you know, as a player that's on the decline of their career, the intensity of the game may go down, but you can still have a real appreciation for the game and still love it.
Yeah.
Well, that's what Leo Arlita said.
Yeah.
Arlita said, I love football and I'm still able to play it at a good level, so he's going to keep persisting with it.
Moving on to sort of, we've looked at sort of young player development. I just want to touch on how non-league can help players that have been playing at that level for a while. You know, they're in their sort of mid-20s, but they still can make it through non-league. So obviously the biggest example of all is no other than Jamie Vardy. Spent many years in non-league, played for Halifax, started his career at Stocksbridge, I think. Stowbridge, I can't remember. But that's like tier 8 of non-league, tier 8 of the English system, which is like step 4 non-league. So even in the depths of non-league, he's been found by, I think he went to Fleetwood next, and then obviously to Leicester. But it shows that non-league still provides an opportunity for those who cannot get into an academy anymore. You know, those days are gone, but still provides them a route to playing EFL football. He did just that. So, you know, it's useful in many ways, non-league.
Yeah, and what do we think about the sort of difference in lifestyles? Obviously, playing for non-league clubs, you're on far less money. But like you said, sometimes in the cases of older players, it doesn't really matter. It's about the joy of the game. What do we think is really what would be the main motivation for non-league players at this time? Do you think it is for professional gain, for the sense of community, for just the love of playing football? What would you say, Finn?
I think to play non-league, you have to have a love of football. You know, you're not getting much money at all, but it's all about that sort of camaraderie, as you said, and love of the game, community feel, and knowing you still have a chance to progress through the leagues. I think that's why so many do it. So many have that dream to play in the Prem one day, as Mpanzu did, I'm sure. And non-league can provide that, you know. And that's, I think a lot of players, even at the lowest levels, you know, I know my local team are in sort of the 8th step of non-league, and I remember speaking to one of them once, and he said, it's just, I'm on this journey, and I'm starting at this level, but I will get to a higher, you know, League one day. So it's all about journey, I think, and the love of the game.
What do you think, Mark?
Well, you have to love the game to play non-league. It's that physical where you have to love it. But I'd say some players are doing it just out of the love of the game and just to play it, you know, casually, and then others who are obviously ex-academy players sort of dream of like the higher levels, like even League 1, League 2, and that would be the dream. But I would say for people like Jamie Vardy, he just did it for the fun of it, and he also quit many times playing football. So he actually started out at Sheffield Wednesday, and then he got released. And after he got released, he just quit football altogether. And
went through a difficult period, if I'm right in thinking. I think he had a security tag, police tag on his ankle, and was still trying to train whilst having it on and things like that. And that just sort of just shows testament to how much he loved the game. He was still doing it whilst being under police investigation. I think also, again, to use the example of Ben Foster, and sorry, I know we're going the other way again, but I believe whilst he was still playing in the Premier League for Watford, he was living in the Midlands somewhere,
Yes,
Coventry.
I remember him saying he had to commute sort of 2.5 hours.
Yeah,
training,
and that's obviously a huge distance to travel just to be. I think he was second choice for a lot of that last season that they had in the Premier League. Sort of to go into training week in, week out. That's a hell of a journey, and not only can a non-league club offer a far more community feel, sometimes, like you said, there's going to be friends and family that are a part of a club that could offer you something.
Yeah.
Which was the example of Wrexham, where he had some history there as well, but it's also closer to home. And I think he mentioned again on his podcast that because you don't have to make that journey, because it's far closer to home, there's a lot more you can sort of focus on outside of the travel and the commute. You can really focus and hone in on and feel connected with where you are. And I think it's definitely something that he's benefited from in that last season that he played.
Well, especially for older players, they want to settle down. They now have a family. They don't want to be commuting. I think that was one of Foster's reasons.
Also, you got to think of like less days of training as well in non-league.
Yeah,
which is another thing for old players to consider. You know, because I remember him saying the gaffer Phil Parkinson was very good with him at the time, and said, you know, just come in 1 day a week to training. We'll trust you to keep fit at home, but as long as you come in 1 day a week, train with us, we can accept that. So I think just the flexibility as well for old players is one of the driving factors behind, you know, playing in the non-league.
Yeah, I think like we said as well before, there's definitely this growing momentum from non-league. Particularly if we take the example of FC United of Manchester.
Yes.
Almost as a not anti-establishment, but it's almost a defiant example of how a football club should be run in Manchester. And you've got players that want to be a part of that as well, as opposed to your typical football experience as a player. And it's great that there's now that option for players to be part of these progressive clubs. You've got my home team, Lewis FC, who are the first team in world football to equally play men and women.
Yeah.
You've got not too far from here, West Didsbury and Chorlton FC as well. Very balanced, very ethically sound clubs. And as a player, that must be very appealing, especially whichever direction you're in. If you're trying to climb up the leagues, or if you're trying to have a little slow decline back into retirement, I think it's very exciting to be a part of. Because you've got plenty of volunteers at the clubs as well, and there's just a real sense of community there.
Yeah, I think also there's a lot of, like you said, there's a lot of good going on in non-league. You've got to remember, like Forest Green started in non-league. There's a lot of clubs finding their niche and looking more towards the environment. But I think from the player's perspective, I think having this sort of choice and freedom in your latter years is just brilliant. I mean, especially for goalkeepers like Foster, he did not have to go to Wrexham. He could have carried on playing in the EFL, but I think non-league has just got that special sort of feeling. He wanted to get back into the EFL, of course, but there's something about the non-league that the EFL doesn't have, and yeah.
Well, you're a lot closer to the fans, and it's definitely more of a community.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's why we love it. That's what we're going to cover more here on the Below the 92 podcast. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you all next week.